The dragons of Middle-earth are among the greatest and most iconic in all fantasy. The vile and cunning Glaurung, the gargantuan Ancalagon the Black, and the terrible Smaug. Yet in Tolkien's earliest drafts, we find dragons of a different kind entirely. Dragons of metal. Dragons likely born out of Tolkien's experience in World War I. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover Morgoth's metal dragons. As one might expect, the idea of dragons made of metal comes very early in Tolkien's writings. Indeed, Christopher Tolkien tells us in the Book of Lost Tales Volume 2 that this is his father's original version of the story of the Fall of Gondolin. Just as in the later versions, Morgoth, here called Melko, has long desired to find the location of the hidden city. And just as in the tale of Meglin, which we covered in a recent video, this elf who held a grudge against King Turgon's son-in-law is captured by orcs as he ventures outside the city. Now it so chanced that not long after Meglin went to the hills for the getting of ore, and straying in the mountains alone, was taken by some of the orcs prowling there, and they would do him evil and terrible hurt, knowing him to be a man of the Gondolin. This was, however, unknown of Tuor's watchers. But evil came into the heart of Meglin, and he said to his captors, "Know then that I am Meglin, son of Eol, who had to wife Isfin, sister of Turgon, king of the Gondolin." But they said, "What is that to us?" And Meglin answered, "Much it is to you, for if you slay me, be it speedy or slow, ye will lose great tidings concerning the city of Gondolin, that your master would rejoice to hear." Seeking to save his own life, Meglin convinces the orcs to instead deliver him to the Dark Lord. And here we see a Meglin all too willing to sell out his fellow elves for his own gain. Now the end of this was that Melko, aided by the cunning of Meglin, devised a plan for the overthrow of Gondolin. For this, Meglin's reward was to be a great captaincy among the orcs. The text goes on to say that, like the later tale, after Tuor and his son Earendil are killed, Idril, whom Meglin coveted, would be given to him as a reward. Yet one thing we know about Morgoth is he is a manipulator and makes false promises. As Hurin would say when face to face with the Dark Lord, Morgoth would first take the price, then withhold the promise. Clearly this was an element of Morgoth's character from these earliest drafts, for it says about these promises to Meglin, "And such promises was that evil one fain to redeem." What's interesting here, however, is how active and eager a role in the Fall of Gondolin Meglin plays. Rather than simply giving in to Morgoth's threat and promises, we are told that Meglin counsels the Dark Lord on how to overthrow Gondolin. For Meglin reveals to Melko that not even with all the host of orcs, nor the Balrogs in their fierceness, could any assault or siege hope to overthrow the walls and gates of Gondolin, even if they were to win the plain outside the city. And it is from the mind of Meglin that we get the machine-like dragons. Therefore he counseled Melko to devise out of his sorceries a succor for his warriors in their endeavor. From the greatness of his wealth of metals and his powers of fire, he bid him make beasts like snakes and dragons of irresistible might that should overcreep the encircling hills and lap that plain and its fair city in flame and death. Thus Melko assembles all his most cunning smiths and sorcerers, and of iron and flame they wrought a host of monsters such as only would be seen once. And it is told they would not be seen again until the Dagor Dagorath. Some were all of iron, so cunningly linked that they might flow like slow rivers of metal, or coil themselves around and above all obstacles before them. and these were filled in their innermost depths with the grimmest of the orcs. And others are made of bronze and copper, and given hearts and spirits of blazing fire. And thus it would be with great machines, snakes and dragons of metal, that Melko would launch his attack upon the city. And now came the monsters across the valley, and the white towers of Gondolin reddened before them. But the stoutest were in dread, seeing those dragons of fire and those serpents of bronze and iron that fare already about the hill of the city, and they shot unavailing arrows at them. Yet for a time there was hope, as the steepness of the hill leading to the city kept the snakes of fire from climbing it. However, Gothmog, the lord of Balrogs, gathered all the things of iron and bade them pile themselves before the northern gate. And behold, their great spires reached even to its threshold, and thrust at the towers and bastions about it. And by reason of the exceeding heaviness of their bodies, those gates fell. And though most of the walls of Gondolin would hold firm, the topmost of the metal dragons opened about their middles, and an innumerable host of orcs poured therefrom into the breach. Thus would the hordes of Melko enter the city, and the fall of Gondolin had begun. Describing these monsters of metal, Tolkien says, "And they blasted all that stood before them with the terror of their snorting, or trampled whatso escaped the ardour of their breath. Yet others were creatures of pure flame, that writhed like ropes of molten metal, and they brought to ruin whatever fabric they came nigh. And iron and stone melted before them, and became as water. And upon them rode the Balrogs in hundreds. And these were the most dire of all those monsters which Melko devised against Gondolin." An interesting side note here, the Balrogs, which in this draft numbered in the hundreds, are described as having whips of flame and claws of steel. Another incorporation of metal in beings we don't usually associate with the material. But what of these snakes and dragons of metal? Were these serpents of bronze and iron merely machinery piloted by some orc or Balrog? It would seem they were not some vehicle, but rather sentient beings themselves. As Christopher Tolkien points out in his notes following this chapter, these things of iron are referred to as ruthless beasts, and it's said that Gothmog bade them pile themselves, seeming to indicate these creatures were capable of cruelty themselves, as well as taking orders. Another clue comes in a paragraph describing their creation. As we looked at earlier, Tolkien describes the bronze and copper dragons having been given hearts and spirits of blazing fire, which Christopher also points out in his commentary. Now, these metal dragons can be seen as resembling a siege tower in a way, including in this depiction by Roger Garland. But the inspiration for these creatures of Morgoth may have struck much closer to home for J.R.R. Tolkien, as there would be real-world metallic creatures that could house soldiers while bringing fire and death, making their debut in World War I. For on September 15th, 1916, tanks would be used in battle for the first time. And the battle they are used in is the Battle of the Somme, one of the bloodiest battles in human history, and the battle where J.R.R. Tolkien served from July to October of 1916. In his book Tolkien and the Great War, John Garth draws connections from Tolkien's fictional Fall of Gondolin to his own personal experience in World War I. And indeed, he also postulates that this initial version of dragons would indeed have been inspired by tanks. And as Christopher tells us, these writings of the Fall of Gondolin, the first that Tolkien wrote, were penned in 1916 and 1917, at most mere months from his experiences in the First World War. And while things like metal dragons pique our interest and provide an interesting glimpse into the development of a story by a master storyteller, And while we can look at this as a foundation for a great tale of tragedy and resilience, we should also recognize this story element for the real-world story it tells. For this great tale of tragedy and resilience is the product of the tragedy experienced and the resilience shown by the author who wrote it. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Freya Firestar, Chris and Meg Q, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Z and N, Evely, Kia, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.